My sincere gratitude for watching our channel. Please subscribe, leave your like and activate the bell for new videos. He had everything people usually dreamed of. Mansions with gates taller than most city walls, cars that gleamed like liquid silver, and accounts so heavy with zeros they could bend reality. Yet every morning when he woke up and stared at the ceiling carved with ornate patterns, he felt like a prisoner trapped inside a palace of gold. To the world he was nothing more than the billionaire's son, not a person, not an individual, just an extension of someone else's empire. Every time he entered a room, people saw his last name before they saw his face. At charity galas, strangers shook his hand not because they cared about who he was, but because they wanted a connection to his father. At business meetings, he was expected to sit silently in the corner, groomed like an heirloom waiting to be inherited. And among so-called friends, he could almost hear the clinking of their calculations. What could they gain from being close to him? What doors could his presence unlock? He was 22, but already exhausted by a life that had never belonged to him. There was a heaviness in being born into wealth, a kind of invisible cage that shimmered so brightly, people rarely noticed it was made of iron. And though he smiled in photographs and played the part he was given, deep inside, something restless clawed at him. He didn't want to inherit companies. He didn't want his future dictated by contracts written before he could even speak. He wanted to breathe, to stumble, to fail and rise again, not because a fortune cushioned his fall, but because he had built his own wings. The decision came to him one night when he attended yet another dinner filled with crystal glasses, heavy perfumes, and conversations so polished they felt rehearsed. Across the table, he overheard a group laughing about people who worked ordinary jobs, waiters, drivers, store clerks, mocking them as though they were characters in a play written for the amusement of the wealthy. Something in him cracked at that moment. He excused himself, walked out of the golden ballroom, and never truly returned. That night, as the city lights glimmered below the mansion's balcony, he made a vow to himself. He would leave. He would disappear from this world that only saw him as a surname and not a soul. He would reinvent himself where no one knew who he was. The plan wasn't simple. Cameras followed him. Bodyguards monitored his every move. His father's empire had eyes everywhere, but determination made him cunning. For weeks he studied the routines of those around him, waiting for an opening. He learned how to slip out unnoticed, memorized train schedules, and prepared a small backpack with only the essentials. He chose a city far away, one that pulsed with anonymity, where nobody cared who you were as long as you paid the rent. The morning of his escape, dawn broke with a grey sky. He stood in his enormous bedroom, staring at the rows of designer suits, the shelves lined with watches worth more than most people's houses. He didn't pack any of it. Instead, he slipped into plain jeans, a worn hoodie, and sneakers that had actually belonged to one of the driver's sons. For once, he looked at his reflection and saw not the heir to billions, but a young man about to write his own story. Slipping through the side gate, he walked quickly, almost breathlessly, until the mansion shrank behind him. With every step he took away from it, he felt lighter, as though invisible chains were snapping one by one. The train station was noisy, filled with people dragging suitcases, couples arguing over directions, vendors shouting about coffee. He loved it instantly. No one gave him a second glance. No one recognized him. He was just another young man with tired eyes and a backpack. When the train pulled out of the station, he sat by the window and watched the skyline dissolve into countryside. He pressed his forehead against the glass and smiled. For the first time, the future was terrifying, and it thrilled him. The city he chose welcomed him with its chaos. Towering buildings pierced the sky, neon lights flickered on every corner, and streets buzzed with a mixture of laughter, arguments, and the endless rhythm of footsteps. He found a small, crumbling apartment in a neighborhood no one from his old world would ever step into. The walls were thin, the water pipes groaned at night, and the mattress was lumpy. But it was his. Every crack, Every stain was a reminder that he had chosen this life. Money wasn't an issue. He had enough hidden away to live comfortably for years, but that wasn't the point. He didn't come here to coast on his inheritance. He came to feel life, raw and unfiltered. So he searched for work. The irony wasn't lost on him. The son of one of the richest men in the world, walking into restaurants with a folded resume and asking for a job. Most places didn't even look twice before turning him down. Experience mattered more than charm. But in a small family-owned cafe tucked on a quiet street, the owner handed him an apron and said, "Let's see how you handle a tray." And so the billionaire's heir became a waiter. The first days were clumsy. He spilled water, forgot orders, tripped over chairs. His co-workers laughed, not cruelly, but with a kind of warmth that said, "You'll learn." And he did. Slowly, he learned to balance plates, to take orders with a smile, to rush between tables when the cafe was packed with customers who just wanted a decent meal and a kind word. That night, he returned to his small apartment with aching feet and a sore back, but also with a strange kind of pride. The kind of pride that came from knowing he had earned his day, from feeling that no one had handed it to him. More importantly, no one knew his last name. No one bowed to him, flattered him, or treated him like glass. He was simply another young man working hard to pay the bills. And for the first time in his life, that was enough. Yet deep down, he also knew this new chapter would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Because while he had successfully escaped the golden cage, freedom came with its own challenges. And in the middle of this new, unpolished life, love was waiting to find him. Something far more dangerous, far more transformative than the empire he had left behind. This was only the beginning. The city welcomed him not with red carpets or flashing cameras, but with the raw, unpolished embrace of anonymity. It was a place where people rushed past each other without a second glance, where no one cared about the name stitched into your shirt or the logo on your shoes. For someone who had lived his entire life under scrutiny, this indifference was intoxicating. The small cafe became his world. Its walls were lined with fading photographs. The scent of roasted coffee beans clung to the air, and the bell above the door jingled every time someone entered. Here, he wasn't an heir, a symbol, or a surname. He was just another pair of hands, another voice calling, "Your order will be right out." At first, the job was overwhelming. Customers complained if their drinks weren't hot enough, co-workers barked orders during the morning rush, and the owner didn't tolerate laziness. But he welcomed it. Every drop of sweat, every sore muscle, reminded him that this life was real. It wasn't polished or prearranged, it was raw, messy, and alive. He learned to read the rhythm of the cafe, the early morning surge of sleepy office workers desperate for caffeine, the slow afternoons when sunlight poured through the windows and regulars lingered with books, the evening hush when couples shared desserts and quiet conversations. Slowly, he began to recognize faces, to memorize preferences, to feel part of something that didn't exist in his old world. And then there was her. She worked beside him, moving between tables with an effortless grace he envied. Her laughter filled the cafe like music, light and genuine, unpolished by pretense. She tied her hair back in a messy knot, wore no expensive jewelry, and spoke to every customer as though they mattered. In her presence, he felt a kind of warmth he hadn't known he'd been missing. She didn't know his last name. She didn't care about his family. To her, he was just the clumsy new co-worker who struggled with trays and sometimes mixed up orders. And for him, that was a blessing. Their friendship began with small moments, sharing jokes while cleaning tables, laughing when they both reached for the same sugar jar, walking together after late shifts under the glow of streetlights. The city, with all its noise and chaos, seemed to quiet down when he was beside her. But with every step he took into this new life, the weight of his secret grew heavier. She believed he was like her, someone working to pay rent, someone counting coins at the end of the day. She didn't know about the mansion, the luxury cars, or the empire that still had his name carved into it. And every time he saw her smile, he feared what would happen if she ever found out. Still, he held on to the lie. Not because he wanted to deceive her, but because he needed to know if someone could love him without the wealth, without the name, without the shadow of his father's fortune. In this hidden life, He discovered things about himself too. He learned how to stretch money, how to fix a broken faucet, how to live without a driver or a personal assistant. He stood in grocery store lines, folded laundry in a laundromat, and sat in crowded buses, shoulders pressed against strangers. These were ordinary things, things most people took for granted, but for him, they were revelations. And the city itself became his teacher. Its streets were filled with stories, street musicians pouring their souls into violins, children laughing as they chased pigeons across the square, old men playing chess in the park as though time had paused just for them. He watched, listened, absorbed. For the first time, he wasn't watching life from behind tinted windows. He was part of it. But freedom came with challenges too. There were nights when the bills stacked up faster than he could count, days when customers yelled at him for mistakes, moments when loneliness pressed against him like a storm. He was no longer cushioned by wealth. Every misstep had consequences, and yet, even in the struggle, he felt alive. The double life, however, couldn't last forever. His family didn't know where he was. The media speculated endlessly, some claiming he was traveling abroad, others suggesting scandals. But he knew eventually the threads would connect. Someone would recognize him, or his father would send someone to drag him back. And then there was her, the girl who looked at him and saw not an heir but a man. The closer they grew, the more dangerous the truth became, because one day he would have to answer the question that haunted him every night. How do you tell someone that everything they know about you is only half the truth? For now, though, he chose to live in the fragile beauty of the present, to serve coffee, to share laughter, to walk through streets where no one whispered his name, to be at last simply himself, even if that self was built on a secret too heavy to hide forever. And as the city lights flickered around him, as his hidden life unfolded in quiet, ordinary moments, he didn't realize yet that love was slowly entangling itself into the story he had tried so hard to rewrite. Because you can escape a golden cage, you can run to a new city, hide your name, and build a life from scratch. But the heart has its own way of writing destiny, and his was only just beginning to reveal its plan. Life in the cafe soon became more than just a way to pass the days. For him, it was the closest thing he had ever felt to freedom. Every morning when he tied the apron around his waist, he stepped into a world where nobody cared about who he had been, only about whether their coffee was hot and their slice of pie came with enough whipped cream. It was simple, yes, but it was real. And in that reality, there was her. She wasn't dazzling in the way society pages defined beauty. She didn't wear diamonds or designer gowns. Her clothes were modest, her shoes sometimes worn at the edges. Yet every time she smiled, it was as if the room brightened. There was an ease in the way she carried herself, a warmth that spilled into her laughter, and a fire in her eyes that revealed she had dreams bigger than the walls of the cafe. At first he thought it was just admiration. She was good at what she did, balancing trays, remembering regulars' orders, soothing grumpy customers with patience he didn't think possible. But soon he realized it wasn't just her skill, it was her spirit. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't calculating what she could gain from those around her. She was simply herself. For a man who had lived his entire life surrounded by masks, that authenticity was intoxicating. Their connection began in moments so small, so ordinary, he almost didn't notice them at first. The first time it was a shared glance when a customer spilled coffee all over the table, both of them trying not to laugh as they rushed to clean it up. Then it was the day she caught him fumbling with too many plates and teased him, calling him rookie. He laughed harder than he had in years. They began talking during quiet hours, leaning against the counter as the hum of the espresso machine filled the silence. She told him about her family, about the little apartment she shared with her younger sister, about how she worked 2 jobs to help pay for school. She spoke of her dreams with such conviction, it made his chest ache. Dreams of finishing her studies, of traveling, of building a life that was truly hers. He listened, captivated, and when she asked about him, he carefully crafted a story, half-truths woven into believable fabric. He told her he had moved from another city, that he wanted to start fresh, that his family was complicated, all of which were true, but not in the way she thought. He didn't tell her about the mansion, the wealth, the empire waiting for him like a crown too heavy for his head. For the first time in his life, he felt like someone was seeing him, not the heir. And the more she looked at him with those curious, trusting eyes, the more dangerous it became to keep the truth hidden. But he couldn't stop. He wanted to hold on to this fragile illusion a little longer. Their friendship blossomed naturally. After late shifts, they began walking together, their steps falling into rhythm along the quiet streets. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. Silence with her wasn't awkward, it was comforting. One night they stopped at a food stall near the park. He watched as she devoured a cheap sandwich with more joy than any of the 5-course meals he'd ever tasted at home. She caught him staring and laughed, wiping crumbs from her lips. "What?" she teased. "Never seen someone actually enjoy food before?" He shook his head, smiling. "Not like that." It was in that moment he realized how different she was from everyone he had known. She didn't need wealth to be happy. She didn't measure life in luxury, but in laughter, in shared meals, in small victories. And he wanted to be part of that world more than anything. Still, there were moments that haunted him. When she spoke about struggling to pay rent, when she counted coins before buying groceries, when she worked double shifts just to afford her classes, his chest tightened with guilt. He could solve all her problems with a single phone call, with a single swipe of a card. But if he did, she would know. She would see the truth he was so desperate to keep hidden. And so, he said nothing. The connection between them grew undeniable. At the cafe, their co-workers teased them gently, nudging each other when they noticed how often their eyes met across the room. He brushed it off with a laugh, but inside, he knew they were right. Something was growing between them, something fragile yet powerful enough to shake the foundation of his carefully constructed lie. One evening after closing the cafe, they sat outside on the steps, the night air cool against their skin. She leaned back, staring at the stars. "Do you ever feel like life is too small for your dreams?" she asked softly. He turned to look at her, the street lamp casting a golden glow across her face. "All the time," he admitted. She smiled faintly. "But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it means we're meant for more." Her words hit him like a quiet revelation. Here was someone who dreamed not of wealth, but of purpose. Someone who saw life as a canvas, not as a cage. And sitting beside her, he wondered, maybe he had finally found the person who could show him what it truly meant to live. Yet beneath the beauty of their connection, a storm brewed silently. Because he knew that every smile, every laugh, every moment they shared was built on a foundation of half-truths. And when the day came that she discovered who he really was, he feared the entire world they had created together would crumble. Still, he couldn't let go, not yet, because for the first time love had found him. Not in the polished halls of mansions, but in the messy, imperfect rhythm of a cafe, in the laughter of a girl who believed he was just as ordinary as she was. And that unexpected connection, fragile and dangerous, was about to change everything. Love, when it arrived, did not come with fireworks or grand gestures. It didn't announce itself in sweeping symphonies or cinematic kisses beneath the rain. Instead, it crept in quietly, woven into stolen glances across the cafe, into the laughter that bubbled between them during late-night walks, into the comfort of silence when words were unnecessary. He hadn't planned on falling in love. He had only wanted to escape, to breathe outside the suffocating shadow of his family's fortune. But love has a way of finding us when we least expect it, when we are vulnerable, when we are stripped of the defenses we've carried for too long. And she had disarmed him completely. At first he thought it was simply companionship, the relief of being seen as ordinary, of being valued for his presence rather than his name. But soon he realized that every morning felt brighter because she was there. He caught himself watching the way sunlight spilled across her face when she leaned near the cafe window, the way she brushed her hair back when she was concentrating, the way her laughter lingered in the air long after it faded. She made the ordinary extraordinary, and yet the deeper his feelings grew, the more dangerous his silence became. Because every smile he offered her, every promise of friendship that edged dangerously close to something more, was wrapped around a secret. He wasn't who she thought he was. He wasn't the struggling young man with barely enough to pay rent. He wasn't the simple co-worker she teased about clumsy hands and crooked ties. He was the heir to billions, the son of a man whose name commanded fear and respect in equal measure. And he was terrified that the truth would destroy everything. The first time he realized how heavy the lie had become, they were sitting in the park after work, sharing a bag of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor. She had leaned against him, tired but happy, her voice soft as she said, "You know, it's nice having someone who understands what it's like to struggle, to work hard, to fight for every step. It makes me feel less alone." His chest tightened with guilt so sharp it nearly stole his breath. She thought he understood her struggle. She thought he lived it, breathed it, carried it just as she did. And though he had chosen this life, though he had traded luxury for simplicity, he knew it wasn't the same. Because if he wanted to, he could make a single phone call and erase every obstacle in her path. But if he did, he would lose her trust. And so, he nodded, forcing a smile, and said nothing. Days turned into weeks, and their closeness deepened. They began spending time together outside of work, wandering through flea markets, sitting by the river, staying up late in tiny diners where neon lights flickered above them. He learned the cadence of her dreams, the rhythm of her fears, the texture of her laughter. And in return, he offered pieces of himself, stories carefully chosen, truths wrapped in omissions. The irony was not lost on him. He had run from a life built on expectations only to create another life built on lies. One evening, when the cafe was nearly empty, she brushed flour from her apron and asked him, "Do you ever think about the future? About what you really want?" He froze. The truth rose in his throat like a tide he couldn't control. He wanted to tell her everything, that he was not who she thought he was, that he carried a name she might see as a curse, that his world was bigger, messier, more dangerous than she could imagine. But when he met her gaze, filled with trust and hope, the words died on his lips. Instead, he said, "I just want a life that feels real." She smiled at that, her eyes softening. "Me too." He told himself he would reveal the truth one day, when the time was right, when their bond was strong enough to survive the shock. But each passing day made it harder. Each shared laugh, each lingering touch, each near confession only tightened the web of secrets around him. And yet, love has a way of growing even in the most fragile soil. The first time he kissed her, it wasn't planned. They had been walking home after a long shift, the streets quiet, the night air cool. She stumbled slightly on the uneven sidewalk, and he caught her by the hand. When she looked up at him, her smile fading into something softer, something more vulnerable, he felt the world tilt. The kiss was gentle, hesitant, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "I didn't expect that." "Neither did I," he admitted, his voice low. But from that moment there was no denying it. They were no longer just co-workers, no longer just friends. They were something more, something fragile, something precious, something built on the dangerous foundation of secrets. As their relationship deepened, so did his fear. He knew he couldn't keep hiding forever. The truth had a way of surfacing, of clawing its way into the light no matter how deep you buried it. And when it did, he risked losing not only her trust but the very love that had given him a reason to fight for this new life. There were close calls. Once she saw the faint outline of an expensive watch he had forgotten to leave behind, and he brushed it off as a gift from an uncle. Another time, she teased him about how well-mannered he was, joking that he must have grown up in a castle. He laughed, but inside his heart raced. Every day the lie grew heavier. Every day love grew stronger. And every day the collision between the two drew closer. He told himself that love could survive the truth, that she would understand once she knew why he had hidden it. But at night, lying awake in his tiny apartment, he couldn't silence the fear that once she saw the wealth, once she knew the name, she would never look at him the same way again. Because their love had been built on the beauty of simplicity, on the belief that they were equals. And he couldn't bear the thought of her realizing the scales had never been balanced. Still, he held on, because even if it was fragile, even if it was dangerous, it was the first love that had ever felt real. And he would do anything to protect it, until the day came when protecting it meant telling the very truth that could shatter it. Secrets are strange things. At first, they feel small enough to carry, like a stone tucked in your pocket. You tell yourself it's harmless, temporary, something you'll set down when the time is right. But as days pass, that stone grows heavier, sharper. You feel it pressing against you with every movement, reminding you that it's still there, that it won't disappear just because you refuse to look at it. For him, the secret of his true identity had become unbearable. Every day he worked beside her in the cafe, laughing with her, brushing her hand when they reached for the same cup, stealing glances when he thought no one was watching. Every day he walked her home beneath the city lights, listening to her dreams, her fears, her laughter. And every day he lied, not by inventing stories, but by withholding the truth that defined everything about who he was. The risk of revelation haunted him like a shadow. It wasn't only about losing her, it was about losing himself, because in her eyes he was ordinary, simple, someone who struggled and dreamed just like her. If she knew the truth, that he had been born into unimaginable wealth, that he had run away from a life of luxury and power, would she ever look at him the same way again? Would she see him, or would she only see the empire he carried in his name? The first cracks began to show when the past came too close for comfort. One evening, the cafe was busier than usual. A businessman in an immaculate suit entered, his expensive watch glinting under the lights. He ordered coffee with a tone that dripped with arrogance, snapping his fingers when it wasn't served quickly enough. Most of the staff avoided his gaze, but when his eyes fell on the young waiter, he froze. Recognition flickered there. For a moment, the world tilted. The businessman's lips parted as if to speak, to name him, to pull his hidden world into the open. But then, the moment passed. The man said nothing, perhaps uncertain, perhaps unwilling to cause a scene. Still, the young heir's pulse raced. His hands shook as he carried the tray. She noticed. "Are you okay?" she whispered when they crossed paths behind the counter. He forced a smile. "Yeah, just a little tired." But inside, he knew how close he had come to losing everything. From then on, paranoia followed him. He scanned faces in the crowd, certain someone would recognize him. He avoided certain parts of the city, fearful of being spotted by people from his old life. He lived with the constant tension of a man walking a tightrope, knowing that one slip, one careless word could shatter the fragile world he had built. And then there was her. She trusted him completely. She told him about her childhood, about the nights she stayed awake worrying whether the rent would be paid, about the little victories that made her proud. She leaned on him, believed in him, built dreams with him. And every time she did, guilt gnawed at him sharper than ever. The truth pressed harder each day. Sometimes he rehearsed how he might tell her. He imagined sitting her down, holding her hands, confessing everything. The mansion, the wealth, the father whose name commanded empires. He pictured her shock, her anger, her betrayal. And though he longed for the possibility that she might understand, fear always silenced him before the words left his lips. The risk was too great. But love has a way of demanding honesty. It thrives in truth, withers in deception. And as their relationship deepened, the walls he had built around his secret began to crumble. One night after closing the cafe, they walked along the river. The city lights shimmered across the water, reflecting like scattered stars. She leaned against the railing, her hair catching the breeze, her eyes soft as she looked at him. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Of course," he replied, though his heart raced. "Sometimes it feels like you're hiding something, like there's a part of you I don't know." His breath caught. The moment he had dreaded was here, raw and unavoidable. He opened his mouth, words trembling on the edge of escape, but then she smiled faintly, brushing it off. "It's okay if you're not ready. We all have our secrets." Relief and guilt crashed over him in equal measure. She trusted him enough to let it go. And yet, her words pierced him because he knew love couldn't survive forever in the shadows of secrecy. The risk of revelation grew heavier still, when the world he had left behind began creeping closer. His father's name surfaced in news headlines. Another acquisition, another gala, another photograph of the man whose empire he had walked away from. And though he tried to avoid it, the world was inescapable. He saw the newspapers in kiosks, heard snippets of conversations, caught glimpses of headlines on passing phones. One evening as he entered the cafe, he froze. She was sitting at a table during her break, scrolling through her phone. On the screen was an image of his father, surrounded by reporters. "Can you imagine being born into that?" she said, shaking her head. "Some people have everything handed to them. I wonder if they even know what real life feels like." He swallowed hard, forcing a laugh. "Yeah, I wonder." But inside, panic twisted like a knife. The line between truth and lie was razor thin now, and he balanced on it every day. He knew the risk was no longer about if the truth would come out, but when. And when it did, he feared it wouldn't just cost him her love. It would cost him the only version of himself he had ever truly wanted to be. Because he wasn't just hiding his identity, he was hiding the very thing that defined their relationship: equality. The moment she discovered who he really was, the fragile balance between them would shatter. And so he lived with the unbearable tension of a man in love, knowing that every heartbeat carried him closer to the revelation that could ruin everything. Legacies are like chains. Some are forged from gold, shining with pride, carrying honor and tradition. Others, no matter how precious, weigh like iron, binding those who inherit them to paths they never chose. For him, his legacy was both: a kingdom of wealth, prestige, and power, yet a prison he had escaped only by walking away, by becoming someone else entirely. But as much as he tried to run, legacy has a way of finding you. He had lived quietly for months, building a life defined by simplicity and love. The cafe, the laughter, the warmth of her presence, all of it felt like freedom. But beneath the surface, the truth remained, waiting like a storm at sea. And storms, no matter how far off the horizon, always come closer. It began with whispers. A story in the news about a missing heir, a photograph in a magazine that bore too much resemblance to the man pouring lattes at a corner cafe. Conversations hushed when he entered the room, curious eyes lingering longer than before. And though she noticed none of it, he felt the walls of his other life closing in. His father's world was calling him back. One night a letter arrived, slipped beneath the cafe's door, its envelope heavy, its seal unmistakable. He didn't open it at first, just stared at it, as if it were alive, as if the moment he tore it open, everything he had built here would crumble. When he finally unfolded the parchment, the words felt like shackles. "Your place is here. Your responsibilities await. Return, or everything you have tried to escape will come crashing down, and those you love may not be spared." It wasn't a request, it was a command. For days he carried the letter in his pocket, its weight like lead. He tried to go on as if nothing had changed, serving customers, laughing at her jokes, walking her home beneath the streetlights, but every smile felt borrowed, every laugh stolen from time he didn't deserve. He stood at a crossroads, and the choice tore him apart: heart or legacy. On one side was love, pure, untainted, the first real thing he had ever claimed for himself. On the other was duty, the life he had been born into, a legacy too vast to ignore. He knew he couldn't have both. To choose her meant betraying the family that had raised him, turning his back on everything his name commanded. To choose his legacy meant breaking her heart, vanishing from her life like a ghost. He tried to imagine it, walking away from her, letting her believe he was just another man who came and went. The thought alone hollowed him out. He pictured her eyes the moment she realized he was gone, the silence where his laughter used to be, the emptiness in her walks home at night. And the idea of her pain was more unbearable than any duty his father could demand. But what if she learned the truth? Would she forgive him for hiding it all this time? Would she understand that the man she loved wasn't just a waiter in a cafe, but the heir to a fortune that could change the lives of everyone around him? Or would she feel betrayed, tricked, as though every moment between them had been built on lies? The answer came one evening when he found her sitting alone in the cafe after hours, her phone in her hands, her face pale. On the screen was a headline: "Heir to empire missing for over a year. New clues emerge." And below the headline, his face. She looked up at him slowly, her eyes wide with disbelief. "It's you," she whispered. He wanted to explain, to fall to his knees and beg for her to see the truth of his heart. But no words came fast enough. The silence between them was deafening, filled with all the things he should have told her and never did. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice broke, raw with hurt. "I was afraid," he said, his voice trembling. "Afraid that if you knew, you wouldn't see me anymore. You'd only see the wealth, the legacy, and I couldn't bear to lose the only person who's ever loved me for who I really am." Tears welled in her eyes. She turned away, gripping the counter as though steadying herself against the world. "You lied to me," she said, "every day, every moment. How can I trust anything now?" His chest caved with the weight of her words. He wanted to tell her that every smile, every laugh, every touch had been real, that the love between them was the truest thing he had ever known. But love built on silence and secrecy is fragile, and hers had cracked beneath the truth. She walked out that night, leaving him alone in the cafe, the echo of her footsteps louder than any storm. For days he didn't see her. He moved through life like a ghost, trapped between two worlds. His father's letters grew more urgent, demanding his return. The cafe felt empty without her laughter, the city streets colder without her by his side. He had lost her, and with her the only version of himself he had ever believed in. But love is strange. It bends, it breaks, it withers, and sometimes, against all odds, it endures. One evening he found her waiting by the river, the place where they had shared so many walks. Her eyes were red from tears, but there was a fire in them he hadn't seen before. "I don't care about your father's empire," she said, her voice steady. "I don't care about your wealth or your name. I just care about the man who made me laugh, who held my hand, who made me believe I wasn't alone in this world." He stepped closer, afraid to breathe, afraid she might vanish like a dream. "But you lied," she continued, "and I don't know if I can forgive that. What I do know is that I can't stop loving you, and maybe that's the cruelest part of all." Her words cut and healed all at once. He took her hand gently as though it might slip away again. "Then let me prove it to you. Let me prove that my love is stronger than any legacy, that I'd burn down every empire in my name if it meant keeping you." For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly her fingers tightened around his. The choice was made. He would face his legacy, not as a prisoner, but as a man who chose love above all else. He would confront his father, stand against the empire, rewrite the destiny that had been forced upon him since birth. Because love, real love, was worth the risk. And as they stood by the river, the city lights shimmering around them, he knew the truth at last. A legacy may be inherited, but a heart must be chosen. And he chose hers again and again for the rest of his life.